Right, good morning everybody. I can see everybody's coming through on the system now, so there are people actually there. I'm Steve Smedley, Acuity Associate, and I'd like to welcome you all to another Acuity webinar. This is the first in our spring series that aims to pick up white paper themes. I'd also like to introduce Colin Sales, from 3C, who has switched light bulbs on for many of you at previous Acuity events, as well as worked with a number of you on your own IT projects. And yeah, the thrust of Colin's talk today is about perhaps in a post-COVID world, challenging some of your thinking about IT and how you approach it. The other thing I'd say about Colin is, unlike many out there, he's actually devoted time to understanding the needs of smaller associations. So basically, in the context of what we've learned from COVID, we'll be exploring how tech might help us with white paper challenges, as well as the stuff that keeps you awake at night, namely what makes for good IT strategy, sourcing and implementation, but also perhaps a little bit of a glimpse of what things might look like in a few years' time. So before I hand over to Colin, just the dreary housekeeping issues. This webinar is scheduled to last for an hour. If you've got a tech issue during the session, use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to get in touch with James. James, give everybody a wave. And he'll try and sort out those tech problems for you. You know, if you've got problems with sound or vision, David Bowie might say. Well, he would have said it. He's dead now, of course. Colin will be taking questions at the end of his presentation. What we're going to do is, again, at the bottom of your screen, just along from chat, you should have a Q&A function. Please write your questions as succinctly, briefly and to the point as you can. I'll be sifting through them and I'll be putting them to Colin, as I said, at the end of his session. A recording will be available on the website shortly after we've finished, along with Colin's slides. So don't worry about taking too many notes or whatever. Obviously, we hope the recording will be there as a resource for yourselves, but also for any colleagues that haven't made it today. That's enough from me. Colin, let rip.
Good morning. Good morning. As I say, hopefully most of you know me. I'm Chief Executive of 3C Consultants, and we're one of the leading providers of specialist IT consultancy to the sector. I got into consulting for the first time about 5 years ago. Prior to that, I'd run two IT services businesses for 25 years, and one of those was fairly heavily involved in the social housing sector. So my knowledge of the sector goes back to around about 2000. And I've been fairly actively involved since then. Throughout that whole period, I've been kind of at the cutting face of IT. I put, you've probably come across the Internet of Things, and I used IoT to start to monitor computer systems back in 2008, sorry. And by 2012, we completely changed the way in which we ran an IT services business, from being very much telephone based to becoming very much about internet based calls. In fact, 80% of all our calls started to come over the internet, or proactively via these sensors that we put on computers. So a lot of the technologies I'm going to talk about today may appear new, but they actually date back quite some time. We're just getting to grips with them now. Anyway, I'm going to start sharing my screen with you, and hopefully you can now all see that. Could I have a quick thumbs up, Steve, to just let me know that that's No, you can't see it. Hold on. That's because I haven't pushed the share button. So as remarkably technical as I might be, it would help if I mastered some of the technology. Anyway, so we're there. So I'm going to try and challenge some of your thinking today. We're living in a very different world since COVID came along, and certainly it's changed the way I think about a lot of my life now, probably more than almost anything else that's ever happened in my life. It's changed the way I think about the way I work, the way I play, and indeed in some cases the way I think. So this is all about setting the scene at first. We're not going to get into IT immediately. Or should we say the kind of IT that we're used to immediately. We're going to just talk about the scene that we are facing at the moment and what's important to us, and try and change our mindsets. Now, it's very important that we change our mindsets, because it's not now just about COVID. It's about various other things that are impacting us. You know, the tragedy of Grenfell has changed quite a bit when it comes to you know, the social housing sector. We have greater compliance like never before. We've got this whole green issue on the agenda, sustainability, which is becoming, I think, a major one for all of us, and quite rightly too. But we also need to change our thinking about IT. We've forgotten what IT is all about. For the last 20 or 30 years, when someone says to you IT, you tend to think about technology. You think about the T. You think about your server and your computer and stuff like that. But it's information technology. Technology is purely an enabler for you to get at information. So it's the I that is now becoming important to most people, and it should be where all the focus is. And why is the I so important? Well, let's look at the things that are on our agendas as organisations now, and we'll start with the new white paper. So this is all about how we provide better service and look after our tenants, and there are a number of things that we are going to need to comply with and demonstrate, and it's all going to be about information. So let's just take a couple of things from the white paper. So one of them, for instance, is to be safe in our homes. And this is going to demand us to have a really good look at our asset register, make sure it's accurate and that there's assurance that the health and safety related things are all in place and satisfactorily completed and recorded and being monitored. And therefore provide us with that aim that every home is safe and secure. And for this to happen, we need to have the assurance that our data is compliant and it's being checked, and that we can demonstrate that our stock is safe. Another one is to know how your landlord is performing. And this is going to mean access to data that provides a single version of the truth, that populates performance dashboards, stands up to scrutiny, and is not, importantly, impacted by manual production of information, which so often has been the cause of mistakes. And not only that, some of this information is compiled using the motivations of those that are compiling the information, and that sometimes puts a slightly different look on what's received, because it you know, it reflects what they want you to see. Now, this isn't good enough. You know, we need to make sure everything is accurate, and this applies to repairs, complaints, safety issues particularly. Tenants need to be able to hold us to account, whether we like it or not. And many HAs don't currently have to comply legally with the freedom of information requests, but this new legislation will mean that there will be a change to that, and we will have to comply. So access to accurate information quickly, both structured and unstructured data, is going to be key. Now, what do I mean by structured and unstructured data? Well, structured data is that you hold in, for example, your housing management system. Unstructured data is data that might be in spreadsheets, somewhere on your server's hard drives, on paper, in email. All these things are going to need to be accessed. So it's quite a different science that we're going to have to get to grips with. Another one is to have your complaints dealt with promptly and fairly. Now this means that we're going to have access to swift information and ideally try and fix things on the first contact, which is, you know, what we'd like to do anyway. But this is going to mean that everyone needs access to information quickly and easily. And there's going to be a strong ombudsman apparently set behind this, so that will give residents swift and fair redress if they need it. So again, you can see the importance of information here to have it at our fingertips. Now I could keep going through various other things within the white paper, but keep coming back to it. It's all about information. We've got the new code of governance that was released by the NHF last year. Now, again, information is absolutely key to showing you're compliant and with the code. But no point anywhere in the code is the word data mentioned, and yet it's going to be absolutely critical to being compliant. The fire safety bill. This is now the one that is replacing the 2005 bill. It's expected to result in far greater clarity over the responsibility of buildings that have more than one home in them. Now that might not affect all of you, but it is going to be very significant out there, and it's going to mean that accurate real-time data that provides the knowledge that assets and inspection information is all being done is available, and that's associated with lifts, evacuation plans, vulnerable tenants, safety instructions, escape routes. All these things have to be accessible, complete, and correct. So information, again, absolutely key to it. In summary, the bill is going to demand legal compliance, that data is available to support proactive and efficient health and safety management and reporting. You know, this is life and death stuff. It is serious, and it's all going to be about providing information and assurance. The regulator released this recently with regards to oversight, risk management and internal controls. And within the Consumer Regulation Review, it states, good quality data forms the cornerstone on which all other assurance of compliance is based. And we would expect registered providers to seek assurance on the quality and integrity of their data in the course of their business. So be under no illusion, the quality of social housing data is very much under the spotlight, and poor data has become the principal cause of breaches of governance standards, which in turn lead to downgrades. So we then start getting the kind of the public face of data. I don't know if you've been watching the news over the last 3 weeks or so, but ITV have had a bit of a field day, their news at 10, talking about various examples of poorly maintained social housing. It's stuff like this that makes it quite relevant. The poor councillor who was sitting there taking questions said that it was quite toe curling, that she had no idea how many properties they had like that, and that this wasn't good enough. She knew that. She just didn't have the information. So if we're going to make information appealing, it's not just about the data, it's about making sure it's relevant to those within our teams that are maintaining it and using it. So we need to make it relevant and appealing. We need to understand what's occupying the minds of those that are inputting the information and making the decisions, and aligning the benefits of it with their needs and motivations. You know, for example, he said, you know, would you prefer to make a decision based on science or gut feel? Well, it's pretty obvious, really, isn't it? Would you like to be empowered to make the right decisions? Do you want to quickly resolve your customers' problems? Do you want to know that your performance reports are correct? You know, I could go on and on and on. These are the things that we need to convince people of for them to properly respect the data that you have within your organization. There's a lot going on at the moment with regards to data and information. You know, 3C are involved in a number of things. The government have just released the new national data strategy, which we provided insight and support into, and we're part of that consultative process. This is all about trying to get the UK at the forefront of the way in which we use and harness data. They've created something called the Data Quality Framework, which is being maintained by the Office of National Statistics, and that is being lobbied currently to the regulator, or the NHCLG is it, of which the social housing regulator is a part. As a result of this, within the sector, we've set up something called the DQG, or the Data Quality Group, of which the organisations like Ict and Housemark, Acuity, and others of the key influencers are all playing a part. And the idea is that we're working together to try and get a uniform view of what excellence can look like, so that people don't have to recreate the wheel, as it were. There's another group, an Ict Framework Group, that has senior ICT people from across the sector involved, and they are also collaborating. That group particularly is looking at the NHF Code of Governance and trying to put an ICT framework behind it. So there's lots going on at the moment, and within the next 12 months, I think we're going to see data and data guidance going right up the agenda. And COVID, just again, 87% of those within the sector who were interviewed said that it exposed real weaknesses in their organisations. I would question the other 13%, to be frank with you, but anyway. And we've seen this whole focus on the need for flexible working, customers be able to access services online. We've seen the need to communicate with our customers online when we can't meet them face to face sometimes. We've seen this requirement for 24/7 working and people working from home at times that will suit them because of childcare and things like this. We're seeing all organisations reduce the footprint of their offices in a great many cases. And we've also seen this focus on the green factor, decarbonisation and sustainability. So there's a lot of things going on at the moment, and these are all going to have an impact on what we're going to be discussing today. You've also got a situation where apparently there are more mergers under discussion currently within the sector than ever before, and I can appreciate some of the reasons for this, but I do passionately believe that big certainly isn't always beautiful, these kind of levels of mergers cause me some concern, because I do believe that so much about service is about understanding your communities, and the bigger you become, the more remote you will often become. And certainly when you sit at that executive level and you talk about the problems that your customers have, you're not talking about them at community level, you're talking about the very big picture. So I think there is a need for us to retain the smaller organisations that can provide that more focused service, and I passionately believe that. But in order for that to happen, we need to ensure that those organisations can be run very efficiently, and there's no reason why that can't happen. But it does mean that we're going to have to consider things like sharing resources, and there's always a fear with something like that will just be a path to merger, and we need to try and escape from that thought. But we might explore that a little bit more later. And there's no reason to believe that small isn't incredibly efficient. In fact, some of you will recall me mentioning East Lothian Housing Association over the years that I've been doing these things, and I'm pleased to say things are going from strength to strength. So very quickly, for those, as a reminder, and for those who don't know, LHA have 1,300 homes. They're based up on the just south of Edinburgh. It's quite a greenfield patch that they have. They've now put all of their core services online through something that they call their My Home portal. And this is, I believe, the leading customer portal in the sector of any size of organization. 83% of their customers now have accounts. 80% of their customers have signed up to be completely paper-free. I say completely paper-free. There's still a number they can call, but essentially everything they do is going to be paper-free through the portal. And 80% of their tenants receive discounts to their rent of between £5 and £25 a month, associated with the their key tenant scheme, which offers customers discounts if they sign up, and it's hugely successful. Now, you probably recall the government set a target a number of years ago now to get 80% of customers' transactions online. Well, Elha are the first, as I understand it, within the sector to have achieved this. And this is not a big housing association. This is not an organisation in the middle of a town centre where there's lots of great internet connectivity. This is a pretty average organisation with a pretty greenfield area that it is serving. So it just goes to show what is absolutely possible. And we need to rethink the way we think about IT. You know, the landscape has changed quite markedly, and we've seen that with COVID-19. You know, let's look at the way we want to consume IT ourselves as well. You know, this idea of software as a service, and there's no infrastructure that we need to worry about. You know, we just use it like it's a utility. We switch it on and we use it, and we use it anytime, any place, anywhere. We don't worry about the backup. We don't worry about business continuity. It's all looked after for us. It's this kind of mentality that gives smaller organizations the ability to enjoy the IT that was previously just the preserve of the large organization. Indeed, I would say probably better IT. And we'll come on to that. You know, we're technology consultants at 3C. We've been independent, you know, running as an organization for over 6 years now, and we have never had a file server. We just have laptops, smartphones, and occasionally we use a printer. Well, that's beginning to be ever less these days. You know, it works extremely well for us, and no one has ever questioned that. You know, we don't have excellent IT. So it works very much for us, and we need to get this kind of mentality going within the sector. But let's just look at the current landscape, as it were, the as is for many, and these are the kind of providers that many of us are aware of and are customers of, and you've kind of got two types of them. You've got those that supply the larger HAs. That have special versions that have been provided for the smaller organisations, and then you've got those that are very specialist for you know, specialising in the smaller sector. So I'm just actually, you might feel I'm going to read a few things now because these have come from colleagues who know a little bit more about it all than I am, and they're on the kind of front line. So so sorry if this sounds a little bit read from the page, but so where suppliers are offering, the larger ones are offering a light version of their systems. The system is exactly the same as that's been implemented for the larger customers. The difference is that they're pre-configured, so that in theory you can simply load your data onto it, take into account the lack of resources smaller landlords often have to manage any implementation. So as a result, the systems are geared up to do most things that are required by general needs housings, and will offer solutions to tasks that in smaller landlords may be managed manually. The suppliers are focused on competing on what's a small and shrinking market, and this has been reflected in the reduction in the overall number of suppliers over the last 20 years, reducing from 10 in in 2000 to approximately about 6 now. And as the suppliers have consolidated or have been acquired by larger groups, which has often been the larger case, the level of reinvestment that's being made was supposed to have increased, but as many of you have probably witnessed, actually it doesn't really seem to have been invested properly in the future at all. And people have, this is due to the business model that these organizations run under. And I can discuss that in more detail later if some of you are interested. As they're working with larger landlords, these organizations have been forced to offer solutions such as mobile working, document management, workflow, CRM, and customer portals by innovating with their customers. And we're seeing this also, the suppliers to the smaller market have not really been under the same kind of pressure, in part because the competition hasn't really been there. But that's all changing. If we look at the specialist providers to the sector, one of the things that's worthy of note is that they tend to be kind of owned by a small number of people, many of which are in their late 50s or even older. It's not clear what will happen to these companies in the longer term, and in some cases there may be evidence of people moving to retirement without necessarily sorting out their succession plans. A good example of this kind of challenge is Paloma. That's a privately owned business, but the founder of that business, Thomas, sadly died last summer. And while the staff are continuing to run the business as before, the long-term future is quite unknown, whether it be sold or whether the owner's beneficiaries will try and continue to run the business. The tendency is to have a heavily bespoke element within this system, and that's a problem because Thomas was the person kind of behind that. So that's causing questions for people like ourselves. But you know, this is a solution that is provided to police and the recruitment sector as well. So it's not just about housing, and it could be around for some time. But I'm not sure if many of you recognise this bunch, but the idea of this slide is the new kids on the block, and what we're going to talk about now is really a new model for the way in which software is going to be delivered. A good example of this is designer software. Now, some of you I know will know designer software or the Home Master system. I know some of you have looked at it quite recently, but we'll look at some other things as well. But the reason I'll dwell on this one for a moment is it's a good example of a completely different model, if you like. It's something that's only been around for a couple of years now, but they are growing at a rate of knots. I'll make it completely clear. We have no connection to designer software. I'm purely using this as an example of what I think good looks like and what the sector needs. You know, when I spoke to a number of you some time ago, they had 15 customers and they were looking at 15 customers live by the end of the year. They now have 20 customers live, and they are winning new customers at a rate of 1 or 2 a month. And in order to be able to win customers at that rate, they need something that's pretty modular, and that's what they've got. The costs of it, I think, are very good, and certainly I know that there may be 1 or 2 of you on this call who found that as a result of reviewing Home Master, they can save quite a lot on what they currently do. It's all pre-configured. It can be implemented in 4 to 6 months. And when you consider with some systems, their implementation times have been 18 months, 2 years. I mean, it's a very, very different process. It has open APIs, so you can join it up with anything else. And there is one cost. There is one monthly fee. and that includes all your support, all your licensing, and it's all looked after for you in the cloud. So you don't need to worry about you know, the kind of things you traditionally have done with IT. So design the software is a good example of a much more flexible approach to a modern approach to software. It can be used on any device, anywhere, just as if you're in the office. Rubix is another version that's kind of similar. It's Simon Ray, who was the individual behind this. Ian Thompson's the individual behind HomeMaster, who'd been around the sector for years, had been behind Kaipira software, so someone who knew software and the sector extremely, housing software and the sector extremely well. Simon Ray, another one. If you were to look at Rubix's website, see all the organisation that he's worked with over the years. Now, this is a similar kind of concept to HomeMaster. They're very new kids on the block, so I've come a couple of years after HomeMaster, and at the moment there are no live sites, although not I'm aware of, and they're working with a 500 home organisation doing a pilot. One of their kind of USPs is that they have a very public pricing model that's £10 per letting asset. So very cost effective. I think there's a minimum number of units, of course, but again, one to watch. We've got an Irish organisation called Binaric, who we're beginning to talk to at the moment. They're already got references in Ireland, and they're looking to move into the UK. This is primarily around development, asset management, and stock control at the moment, rather than a full housing management system. But again, the same principles apply. Anytime, anywhere, connect it to anything. And certainly they're getting very good references from those we speak to. So another to watch. We've then got the bigger players like Salesforce and Microsoft. And at the moment, we're not seeing either of them in the kind of smaller end of the market. But you know, we cannot ignore these players. These are some of the largest, most successful organizations in the world. And if they set their sights on you know, our part of the market, then believe it won't be taking them long to get something in place. And there is every indication that they may be on their way. They're certainly focusing very heavily on the sector at the moment. Salesforce has a very kind of focus on charities. They give away the first 10 licenses free, and they're highly discounted licenses thereafter. You know, it certainly provides a lot of reassurance when you start dealing with organisations like this, who are likely to be around for many years to come. And they can really invest heavily in this area if they choose to. Microsoft have got a big announcement any day now. I think it's 1st of May, they release new discounting, which means that their Dynamics system will become very much cheaper to buy. Now, when you consider that, you know, Microsoft are probably winning from Microsoft Dynamics is probably winning more on the kind of housing management system side than anyone else at the moment, certainly in the larger area of the housing market, then you know, they are a force to be reckoned with. And I know many of us are using 365 now. It's what 3C kind of was built on, 365, and very successful it's been too. So so yeah, expect to see Microsoft in the market fairly soon as well. You know, the one thing these things all have in common is that they have this different business model. You know, it's elastic, it'll scale up and down to meet your needs. Literally, you can take licenses on and off as required. It's all hosted, so there's no backup or disaster recovery worries. It'll run equally well on a mobile device, so phones and tablets. You pay for it on a monthly basis, so very much more awareness about what your costs are going to be. It's all about being able to integrate it as well. None of this issue about, I'm being held hostage and my data won't move out of my housing management system the way I need it to. That's all over with organisations like this, which also therefore means it's much easier to leave them. If you have open data APIs, then if you decide that you want to move from one system to another, it's nowhere near as painful as it has been traditionally. So that's another reason to consider these kind of organizations. There's also the speed in which this stuff is developed. If you look at the larger organizations, and this is a fact, the larger housing management systems, only one of them has been developed this century. The rest of them are all sitting on platforms that date, pre-2000. They were not specifically written with the internet in mind, or COVID-19 and the challenges it was going to provide. And it's also very difficult to, you need to be generally fairly specialist to write software in these languages. So this new software all tends to be about drag and drop technology. You've probably heard about low code and no code. There are kids that are coming out of school now who have been trained how to program in this stuff. So there's going to be a lot of grow your own going on for many organizations that can afford their own skills in this area. And I come back to it. It's a very different business models to the one that traditionally was there, which were much more based on a restrictive model, which held customers very close and made it very difficult for them to leave. These kind of software is very much about that kind of utility approach we were talking about. Almost forgetting what the technology is and just using it to run your business. And that's the mentality we need. Right, we're just gonna have a quick look at what you would need to consider when you're thinking about the future and you're specifying what solution you might want. And again, for a couple of slides, I'm just going to read out some stuff that some of my colleagues have provided me, because they kind of do all this thing all the time. So when specifying what you're looking for, remember the specification forms part of any contract. So don't make any assumptions about what will or will not be there. If you need it and you need to specify, you need to specify it, and be aware of the risk of specifying what you have with a few added wish list items. Think very hard about what you actually need and seek advice from people like ourselves if you think you need it. Wordy requirements lead to misunderstandings. So you think you've said that you can do, they do what you want, but just be very aware that things can be misunderstood. If you're saying a system must do something, or that it is essential that something happens, then just be wary of it, because there will be some organizations that won't bid because they can't comply with that. And you need to be aware really as to what the limitations are of certain systems, because you may find you don't need it. Again, you may find that this is something that is a preconceived thought you have based on what's happened in the past. So just be aware of that. Keep your words limited, and keep your requirements ideally quite brief, maybe to know more than a few, to get the focus very much down on what you really absolutely need. Remember, you need to ask about services, implementation, training, and support. This is the whole piece when it comes down to software, not just what the software itself can do. If you're going to be sending out an ITT, you want to mark your responses in the IT and make sure it's very clear that you've told people how you are going to mark them, so that it's clear for both sides as to how a judgment is going to be made. it's a comment here, it's easier to ask closed questions where you get a yes/no response. And having said that, we've found in the past that even with a closed question, salespeople can do a pretty good job of coming up with lots of different answers to it. But yeah, it does try and keep things fairly precise. With regards to then the implementation of software, the things most likely to throw your project off course is going to be associated with the information, with the data again, and migrating it from what you have to what you're moving to. So try and minimize the amount of data you need to take across from one system to another. Start a cleansing process as early as possible to make sure what you take across is going to be useful. If you need assistance, there's plenty of people out there who can help you, like ourselves. But anyway, you may need to consider the interfaces that there are between the two systems. Generally, you move data into a staging area, and then you move it into the new software when it's in the right format. You then need to just make sure that whole process is managed by someone who knows what they're doing and can make sure that it's controlled properly. There is no reason why this couldn't be done very easily. If you've got the right partners, they can often provide. You don't need that resource in-house. I think it's always wise to have someone, obviously, who has the time and resource available to make sure that any implementation is done right. But when you're looking at these implementations now in 4 to 6 months, it's a very different thing from something that might take a much longer period to install. With regards to budgeting, again, just make sure that you've covered everything. Get expert opinion just to make sure that you've got everything within the budget. These new systems tend to be much more straightforward, and as I say, often just one charge per month. Everything else is included, and just make sure when you're planning, you do it realistically. Do not recreate the wheel. This is something that many have been through on many occasions. So learn from others wherever you can. Just make sure that when you're resourcing it, if you are going to put someone in charge of the implementation internally, then just make sure that they have the time and ability to be able to do it, of course. So yeah, that's a little bit on the kind of the change side. But now I'm going to dwell more about what I think the future might be for us as organizations. Because again, this is where we're going to change the mindset. Now this isn't new. This is a slide that I opened the NHF ICT conference in 2010 and did the keynote speech, and this was my opening slide. And within this presentation, I talked about the community cloud. Now this was something that to me seemed very sensible. So this is where we start to think about sharing resources. No server hardware, no software necessarily that we are buying licenses for, just services that we are provided over fast, resilient broadband networks. We don't own the system, we don't run the system. All we do is make the best use of it, and we can stay completely focused on our business. So this is back in 2010, 11 years ago. So what is a community cloud? Well, there's a definition here. A community cloud is a collaborative effort in which infrastructure is shared between several organizations from a specific community with common concerns, whether managed internally or by a third party and hosted internally or externally. You could argue it's kind of similar to 365. Of course, 365 is not a community cloud. It's a SaaS solution. But if you think about it a little bit like you think about 365, and take it to the next level and say, well, let's say 365 also had housing, asset, contractor, customer portal, data compliance, all within it. And it was that single solution that was bespoke for your business. Then you're starting to get the concept of what we're talking about here. You know, these are solutions which take away a lot of those challenges you have. So they'll do your regulatory returns for you. They'll try and ensure that you comply with the social housing right to paper and the fire safety bill and the code of governance. And they're all geared up to support you to do that. They also provide you with the strategic insight you need as a small organization to make decisions, and they'll support you to work in an agile way from wherever you want. You know, there are some social housing providers who talk about no longer having offices, and yet, you know, that could indeed become a way of the future. So not many slides to go now, but let's just think about this community cloud in a little bit more detail. So you're thinking of a situation where you no longer have servers to worry about, backups, DR plans, hardware support contracts for your server, cabling through the office, space designated for the server, and potentially cooling if some of you have that. No replacement cycle to think about, you know, when is it getting old and less reliable. We're talking about reduction in IT costs generally, and importantly, a reduction in the responsibility for IT internally. You'll never escape it completely, but you're talking to someone who came off their motorbike while checking that the backup tape to their system was still attached behind me on the seat. And I found out it wasn't. And in looking around, I then managed to come off my motorbike and I did myself a bit of damage. Well, that responsibility disappears. I wouldn't have come off my motorbike if I've had access to a kind of a community cloud type arrangement. So we're talking about an IT solution that has 99.99% uptime, you know, one-off fees, data controlled for you so that you know that it's being looked after correctly, that if it's wrong, you start getting alerts that there are problems so you can deal with them. Maybe that's a training issue internally, but there are rules set up around data so that you can ensure that regardless of the fact you're in a small organization, you can have the same kind of security systems in place as those enjoyed by the larger ones. Come to sustainability, particularly around the green credentials. My business, my file server used more power than everything else in the business put together, and that had 60 people working within the office. You know, the server was on 24/7, 7 days a week, and it just drained power. It had heating, well, it had cooling associated with everything. It was the non-greenest part of my business. You're also talking about ensuring with these systems you're always on the very latest versions of things, so you don't have to worry about version control. Reporting becomes much more touch button than it ever did before. With, you know, challenges like income collection that theoretically could be a big issue, you know, as we come out of with universal credit and COVID-19, meaning furlough comes to an end, we're saying that there could be a big increase in income collection issues. So, you know, how do we have those right, the information, intelligence and insight in place to manage that properly? You know, document scanning can be all part of this. So, you know, if there is any paperwork, you can just put it straight into your system. And any costs that there are start to be spread. It's a bit like jointly owning a vehicle or something like that. You know, you can use anytime you want, but you share the costs with someone else. So there are a huge number of benefits. There's a leap that needs to be taken to appreciate these things. But if we can create something like that allows us to focus on our businesses, then it becomes very special. You know, we will protect our income streams. We will be able to create greater efficiencies. We will help improve the lives of our customers and tenants, because we can focus more on how we do that. And we will make the job of managing our organizations much easier. And, you know, if you ever question yourself why you come to work every day, you know, I like to think it's to make people happy. And to make people happy, you need to take away their frustrations. And happiness is generally achieved from when things go right. If things go right in our day, it's a good day. If things don't go right in our day, it can be a frustrating one. And indeed, you know, when our customers deal with us, we want to make that experience as positive as possible. We want to fix things at the first time. We want to make sure we know who they are and we understand them and their communities, and we need the time and the insight to be able to do this. So come back to it. If you ever wonder why you come to work every day, it's this. And I believe that this new environment that we find ourselves being able to tap into provides us with the solution to that. So that brings me to an end of my presentation. We'll now move to the Q&A. I'm very happy to be challenged on things that have been discussed. So please feel free, and I'll now go about working out how to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Colin. Well, that was pretty comprehensive. Thanks for that. That's I think there's loads of handy tips there, right from kind of speccing through to sourcing, through to implementation. But yeah, I mean, I guess the overriding thing is about actually challenging people's thinking, particularly with this notion of software as a service, and you know, and obviously associated with that is the notion of just cloud-based services. So I guess my question to some of our members is whether they buy that, and whether they've started coming to those kinds of conclusions about the traditional approach to kind of purchasing software, etc., that we all kind of know, love, and loathe. So I guess my point to members is, have you already got your head around this? Is this something you're thinking about? Do use your Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to ask questions. We've got some questions in already, and it's a bit of a challenge for you, Colin. Anne saying she appreciates fully just how good ELHA you know, their approach is, their portal, but are they mainly a general needs organisation? And her point is a lot of our members provide, you know, either supported housing or housing for older people, where obviously the personal contact's super important. So she's saying, yeah, our residents like personal contact and often talk to staff because they're lonely. Some can use online services for reporting repairs, etc., but most don't want to. Some joined us because they need personal contact and were very isolated in their homes. So I think while we need to provide the tools to connect digitally, we need to recognise that for some of us, support means personal communication.
And it is absolutely right, and hands up on that one. I think the point I'm trying to make with ELHA is not to say we should all be doing that and we'll all be able to achieve that. It's more that this is a small organisation that's taken a challenge and become the best, you know, within the sector, and therefore size needn't be a challenge to us. You know, when it comes to what Anne's talking about here, it could well be it's one of the smaller organisations, a Acuity member, that becomes the prototype, or should we say the blueprint of what people should be looking to follow. Size should not limit us on something like this. And I know Anne is very forward thinking in her own right, and so she could become a good example of this.
Yeah, and I think the point is with all of these things, it's I mean, you actually mentioned in your presentation the Pareto kind of ratio, 80-20. And I think with a lot of organizations, it's about moving as many people that can and want to access those kind of services. And I know when Nick Atkin, when he was CEO at Halton Housing some years ago, when he sort of, you know, got on this particular, I wouldn't say bandwagon, but I think he forged a bit of a trail. His point there was, if we can migrate as many, do the 80% thing, get as many people accessing digital-based channels in a way that is actually an enhancement for them, because it's easier than making contact with the office and stuff like that. What that does is it frees up resources elsewhere in the organization to do the personal contact. Certainly that Anne's keen on. The issue with Anne's business is obviously 100% of her business is focused on those kind of very needy people. So I guess, or the people that potentially are at risk of loneliness. So there's always going to be that issue about just how far you can take tech in supporting you there. So
it is, as you just said, Steve, it's about liberating those individuals. It's making tech not restrict what they can do. It's and allowing it to enable what they can do. And that's the purpose of tech.
Yeah, brilliant. Also, from a housing for older people background, we've got Helen Barber saying, is there a difference between a housing management system and a CRM system? If so, what is it? I presume a housing focus and a customer focus.
She's spot on again. So a CRM is a customer relationship management system, and it's all about the relationship between you and the customer, rather than, if you like, the management of property and assets and things and rents. So you can bring the two together, but generally they tend to be fairly specialist areas. What we look for is where that line disappears and it all becomes about the customer. So I think the CRM is going to become more important to the average housing association and RP than the HMS will with time.
All right, cheers for that. Yeah, and all I'd say is certainly in the past I've worked for various organisations that don't do social housing and they have a CRM system. So I think one of the CRM systems definitely are a kind of a universal kind of application that for anybody that has customers and wants to make sure that they don't let those customers fall down the back of the settee. Jonathan Card is saying, given that there are many reasons to be wary about migrating to a new system or provider, what's your sense of what the future holds for existing providers in the market for our part of the sector? For example, OmniLedger, 50% of the audience has just booed at that point. Will there be a migration tipping point, and when might we reach it?
Hey, Jonathan, hope you're well. Jonathan and I experienced something going back a number of years now, where one of your challenges with these organisations is they think they've got you. And hence they are just unresponsive to your needs, and it seems to be much more about their needs rather than yours. And it's organizations that have their mentality, if you like, them first rather than their customers, and that's certainly what it feels like with some, which are going to get their comeuppance now. These new solutions are very much less restrictive and very much easier to migrate to. A very important point here is, once you've done one migration from a piece of software to another piece of software, when you do it again, it becomes easier and easier and easier, because you learn all the tricks and stuff. So once OmniLedger, for example, say someone, as has happened, a HomeMaster customer, an OmniLedger customer buys HomeMaster. Once one organisation has moved from one to t'other, then it becomes easier and easier as time goes by, because the same process will apply. You know, your OmniLedger isn't that different from someone else's OmniLedger. So OmniLedger need to get their act together, because they are going to see a migration of customers away from them, and they need to reinvent themselves and stop that happening.
Yeah, yes. Thanks for that. I've just Googled East Lothian, and they've definitely got sheltered properties for older people. I think given that they've blazed such a trail here, it would be dead interesting to see what their approach is as far as their elders are concerned. So that might be worth
I can try and find out.
Yeah, and that
gives me a question. I'll get it answered.
Yeah, fab. Okay, cheers. Right, it looks like I've been tracked down by my old boss, Ross Fraser, who was a CEO at Housemarque, by Joanne Cox. And his question via Joanne is, would a shared community cloud ICT procurement create a contract of the scale that might be interesting to the likes of Microsoft?
Absolutely. It certainly would, and Salesforce and people like that, you know, they would dearly love something like this. My only slight concern is that you know, where you do become dependent on these monolithic organizations. Now there's an argument that we got no choice, it's going to happen. But I love the fact that, you know, with these smaller organizations, you can call up the chief exec and say, you know, hey, what's going on, and things like this. Now, I know an issue raised by some is, well, what happens to these organizations? We've seen them bought by other people. Someone comes along, offers them a chunk of money, and next thing you know, you've got you know, the organization is owned by someone else with a very different mentality and customer ethos. And so you've got the pros and cons of both. But yeah, in answer to the question, I wouldn't be at all surprised if the likes of Microsoft or Salesforce have a community cloud within the next couple of years.
Right. Okay. That sounds like it might be Ross Fraser's next project. I realise we're up to the appointed finish time, and I don't want to drag things out unnecessarily. I think we've cracked through all the questions. Thanks again, Colin, for just such a useful canter through mind expansion and also the practicalities of something that I said in the preamble, I think keeps people awake at night. It's the big spend area, and we all know they often go belly up, or they don't go the way that people wanted. Yeah, thanks so much for that. What we're going to be doing is a recording of this will be available on the website, as will Colin's slides. If people have any further questions that might pop into their head for Colin, I think you're available, and I think your details are on your slide pack. So that's all there. So thanks to Colin. Thanks everybody for attending. Do check out our website, because we've got tons of other material over the course of May on white paper topics, including building safety, tenant's voice, what the regulatory metrics might look like, customer excellence, update from the regulator, who will be consulting in a soft way very, very shortly on those regulatory metrics. And we've also chucked zero carbon in there because it's very topical. That's all from us. Thanks, and hope to see you soon.